Yeah, so you're saying that there is a linguistic impossibility when it comes to trans people? Is that what you're saying?
A linguistic impossibility for all trans people to be valid. In any kind of gendered system, any kind of society, it would be linguistically impossible.
Okay.
Not necessarily that the idea of transitioning to another gender is impossible, although I could discuss about that in our current gender binary in our Western society.
So I
But
guess when you mean valid, you mean like we're gonna recognize them as trans?
well, if you're gonna recognize somebody as trans, that could be like if you agree that they're trans or not. I would say from a logical perspective, a perspective on how language works, it would not be consistent with how language works.
Okay, could yeah, go ahead and break it down because I don't know if I'm
All
following.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so here's the logic. The phrase I'm reading what I wrote down. The
Hmm.
phrase all trans people are valid implies gender is defined. Second proposition. A
Wait. Sorry.
transition.
Oh, okay. I guess you go through it, and then I'm gonna write down some notes too.
Yeah, okay, good head. Okay, so read the first thing. Number
Hmm.
one, the phrase all trans people are valid implies gender is defined. Two, a transition from point A to point B must mean A does not equal B. If you're willing to argue on that point, I can go into it.
Sure.
But
Okay.
going forward, three, people in group A do not equal people in group B.
Sure.
Four, there are characteristics that separate group A from group B. Five, there are requirements to be a member of a group identity, such as group A or group B. Six, the burden of proof to meet the requirements is upon the self-identifier in order to justify membership. Seven, thus, self-identifying is not good enough to transition, and then not all transgender people can be valid.
Okay. So I have a couple things about this. The first thing is that I think we're playing this kind of a weird game when we're playing when we're talking about this language because you're saying that all trans people are not valid, and you're making a descriptive statement when
Wait,
you
not all trans people can. Sorry, making a correction right here. I'm
sure
not saying that all trans people are not valid. I'm saying not all trans people can be valid. This is an important distinction.
okay
And I will go into why in our gendered society as it stands today, really trans people can't be valid.
sure
But that's a separate discussion. This is about any gender system.
sure.
Gender systems can change.
What I'm going to focus in on immediately is why exactly you're making such a distinction when it comes to trans people when it feels like this is how we categorize people in all groups. Um, like, because there are characteristics in group A or group B. There's going to be, like, whenever we use language or whenever we use categories, there's always going to be some sort of like fuzzy, hazy bits in between what we distinguish and what we can't
Absolutely.
distinguish. So I think that it's like, I guess, I
We
don't,
could call that
sorry?
this is that is an important distinction because I've had this conversation with a couple people.
Mhm.
I multiple times it's been brought up. Well, what about the nature of what defines a fan? Like a fan of like a sport or music.
Sure.
And yes, there are fuzzy areas which could be complicated by the vagueness of a definition. And what we could probably call that, if there was just only two groups in the situation, which there could be more, but just for the sake of it, imagine a binary, and
Sure.
imagine there's like kind of like a fuzzy area. We could call that appropriately the non-binary,
The what? Sorry, you cut
in
out.
a way, the non-binary. We could call that middle, that fuzzy section, the non-binary, but it's still,
No,
but
because
it's
that's not what I'm describing. Because if we look at like fans versus not fans of a specific sport, it's not that there are people in the middle who are like in this intermediary period. It's that there are people in the middle who it kind of depends. Depending on who you're talking to, if you would consider them a fan or if you would consider them not a fan. That's just kind of how group identifiers work. There's going to be that haziness. When I use that haziness, I'm not saying like for example, you might be referencing like the TikTok video that I made. I was talking about like the word sandwich, right? And I think that there's some weird hazy lines where it comes to like an oatmeal cream pie, right? Where it's like, is that a sandwich or is hot dog a sandwich, right? It really kind of depends on who you ask, and it's not like there's this separate category of like ambiguity. It's just it operates in this space where it kind of just depends on who you ask. Does that make sense?
I no, I actually do agree. I agree with you that because when I'm making this argument, I'm not actually proposing what is the definition of a gender. I'm proposing any definition would be linguistically impossible for what
Well,
I just
well,
proposed. So if you go up to ask anybody,
every
go say again.
definition, every definition isn't going to be comprehensive
And
because
I'm explaining it because this all goes really back to the proposition two. In transition from point A to point B must mean that A does not equal B. A transition changes. Yes, again, we know what a transition is, so that we must know that A equal B, and then we must know there's a difference between A and B.
sure,
Now,
but
depending who you ask, that difference may be varied, and with language, it's a social construct,
yes,
so
okay,
it just depends on the society or you're talking about. But whoever you are talking about, there is a difference.
sure, yeah, I
That is
agree that
it.
there is a difference between men and women. Yes,
Then, so when somebody's like may say that like, oh, to be a woman is when you say you are a woman, that means that you're self-identifying. The requirements to make up the definition of the group identity um does not include self-identifying, because when you say I'm a woman because I identify as a woman, you're basically saying I'm a woman because I say so,
sure,
which is not justifying your claim that you are a woman. You must say I'm a woman because, for example, I have breasts. Doesn't necessarily have to be the requirement,
sure.
but
There's a
you back it up by saying that I meet the requirements.
Sure. There's a couple things that I would say to this. The first is we kind of use self-identifying for sort of any group that we use. Like for example, depending on who you ask, I might be a socialist, I might not be a socialist. I would probably not consider myself a socialist, but if I talk to a lot of very conservative like families or friends, I've been called socialist a lot. Now, at the end of the day, really what exactly is a socialist depends on who you ask, and it doesn't do a lot of benefit because I feel like I'm sort of in that hazy area where it's like, oh, I support things that a lot of socialists care about, but a lot of socialists sort of like reject me from the group. So it's like I'm kind of in that like sort of hazy-ish period. But at the end of the day, it really just depends on how I self ID. I really just do I declare myself a socialist, because a lot of people who are accepted in those groups, um, they share the same beliefs that I do. They just ID a little differently.
There's so when you say that, for example, when you say that, like, do you want to say you're a socialist? Let me just help
No,
this
I wouldn't. I
example
wouldn't
get better.
identify as one.
Okay, so when you say that, oh, I don't identify as a socialist, whatever you want to identify as independent or whatever, when you say that I don't identify as a socialist, you are prescribing in your head a certain idea of what a socialist is, a certain definition. The
Yes.
problem, the problem is that people don't agree on the definition. I'm not talking about, as to clarify, I'm not talking about whether we all agree on what gender is or we don't agree or nobody agrees. I'm saying no matter what the definition is, it would be linguistically impossible
But
to
you
say
you keep
that
saying
I'm not a
okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, so it seems like you're a little bit confused about why I keep saying that it's
Linguistically
linguistically
impossible, but it feels like
impossible.
that's how I don't understand what
Because
separates gender from all of these other categories that we use in our language.
oh, I'm actually saying I'm applying the logic of other categories to gender. This is what I'm trying to
Okay,
do.
so you're saying that
And so
all
what I'm saying, so when I see that like somebody who's a transgender is saying like I'm a woman because I identify as a woman, or when you ask somebody in the LGBTQ plus community that what is a woman, and they'd be like a woman is when you feel your most inner towardness to the woman. It's not a definition, it's a zombie word, it's a
sh-
dead word. It
sure.
doesn't actually describe to you what a woman is, what are the requirements to be part of the group identity.
Sure. So what I would describe as a woman is essentially like a definition. The way that definitions usually work in language, which is it's sort of like a cluster of characteristics. Like, do you meet a sufficient amount of cluster of characteristics? And that characteristics can be. Some of them are socially driven, some of them are biologically driven, some of them are
I
physiologically
have
driven.
a point. I'm going to let you continue, but I actually kind of have a counter argument. I wouldn't say a cluster of characteristics. I would call something called the common denominator, but I'll let you continue.
Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to
Gotcha.
interrupt.
No, no, no,
I
you're
don't really
good.
like
You're
to
good.
interrupt.
So with like however we define woman, there's not going to be any required characteristic when it comes to woman. Even when it comes to someone like you, there's always going to be these like weird one-offs, these weird one-off exceptions that we use every time that we try to like really hammer down what a woman is. So it seems to just sort of be like a cluster of characteristics, and I think people are generally just interested in expanding that cluster, and I think people are generally just interested in not just expanding the cluster, but also like sort of yeah, just
This
decreasing
is
how
where
much are required.
this is the turning point where I kind of branch off a little bit about the nature of gender because you're touching upon what is gender, and I like to talk about that. So now I wish I had that note in front of me. Oh well, doesn't matter. I'll just talk. So you're saying that like what makes up a gender is really just the cluster of characteristics. And I would say this is actually the inherent flaw of sex. Not sex as in me doing your mom, but sex as in like what
Nice.
is a male and what is a female.
Yeah.
There's an inherent flaw with this. And this is back when I actually was in the LGBTQ plus community because I am a bisexual man and I
Mm-hmm.
used to consider myself part of it. And why I justified supporting trans people is because I already knew that sex does not have what I call a common denominator. And what I mean by a common denominator, I mean the one thing that unifies all people in the group identity. For
Sure.
example, just for example, like say like a libertarian, as somebody who strongly supports individual rights, that is a common denominator. And so when you look at that with sex, you can't actually really find it. You can find plenty of clustered characteristics, but it is really hard to find the common denominator.
I don't
And
think
I know that you want to.
I don't think there's
Sorry,
even a
go ahead.
common. I don't. Sorry. And sorry. Keep. If you feel like I'm cutting me off, like
What
be
I
rude
so
back.
then at that moment, because I already knew this list of thing, but then I came to the conclusion that um gender must be invalid itself. However, I kind of came to a different understanding that there may be a difference between sex, as in male and female, and assigned sex at birth, which I believe does actually have a common denominator. For
Okay.
example, go ahead.
Okay. Sorry.
I'm
I
kind
don't
of
know.
going schizoid over
No. Yeah.
here.
You're good. I don't know why exactly you keep saying that there needs to be a common denominator when it comes to definitions. Like, what would the common denominator be with like a libertarian, which is somehow which is a way
That
that you
is
define.
now I do now that's kind of a hard question because if I define what a libertarian is, I'm probably just going to go into anarcho-capitalism, which you could say is the libertarian may be closer to just a cluster of characteristics rather than really a group identity. And then the more group identity would be a voluntarinist. Somebody who upholds the non-aggression principle would be the
Shh.
common denominator.
Wait,
But
wait,
not
wait.
all
So,
libertarians do that.
yeah, exact. That's and I think that's my point. Is that every time you try to find a common denominator of libertarians, whether it's like you ascribe to like Ayn Rand's objectivism, or like you ascribe to the non-aggression principle, or like you just believe sort of like in very isolationist principles, you can find libertarians who you would consider a libertarian who would ascribe to that ideology who wouldn't necessarily meet that common denominator. And I don't think anytime that we sort of construct categories
Oh, you're
that we
cutting out. Are you am I cutting out over here? Sorry, I didn't you started cutting out just a little bit.
no, you
I
are
would
not
say
cutting
that
out.
I would say that the common denominator does not necessarily have to be very strong. For example, if I were to come up with a common denominator with libertarianism, I would say they're all related because they're within the same family of political, legal, and economic thought that is sharing a strong value of liberty and individualism to varying degrees. But because that common denominator is not that very strong, we get conflicts within the community itself about what is a libertarian. And
Yeah,
maybe there is a group identity, but the group identity is very weak because it lacks a common
I
denominator.
don't. But
And
like,
so,
there. Can you think of any group identity? And when we say group identity, I feel like that's kind of a weird term to use when all identities will find communities to for themselves essentially. So I don't know what the
oh,
adjective over identity
let
is
me let
necessarily
me let
doing
me
with that
let me
word.
separate. So, like, so somebody who's like a difference between like a group identity and somebody like a personal identity is like what makes up you is or sorry, what is you is like your personal identity. Maybe you're not the only person named John, but when I'm saying John, I'm referring to you, and that is your personal identity.
But I feel like
But when I'm saying that you're a libertarian, that is what you are a part of, which I could call that the group identity.
yeah, but the identity also with you is that you are a libertarian because you believe in values that about non-aggression and about isolationism. Like I don't understand what separates so hard these group and singular identities when that's also how you would identify as well. You just found other people who believe in the same thing, but you still believe that independent of them.
That could be both true. Yeah, I would agree. I don't think this would I'm just more talking about groups and how they
Sure, but I guess when you say
identify.
group identity, I just don't know why exactly you're. I don't know. I don't know what the difference is between a group identity and like why you're making that distinction between other identities. When I feel like all identities
Well,
would be
here,
groups.
here, let me explain it like this. Again, I'm not going to say my name, well, I'm going to say my real name because I've said my real name a lot. Jet is my real name. I think I
Okay.
said that at the beginning of the stream. Point is, my real name is Jet. There are other people in the world who perhaps are named Jet, but referring to me as Jet is supposed to be as a placement referring to me. If that makes sense. That makes that like there's only one of me. There is not a group. It's personal, unique to me.
Yeah, but you could what?
While
But like,
saying that I'm
what if you create a weird community where it's just people named Jet? Like, is that now a group identity?
here no. So you could say a group identity would be all the people named Jet, and there are more than one person named Jet. But when you're referring to me as Jet, it's supposed to be a placement in the sentence referring to me. This
Okay.
can go for pronouns or anything.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
yes,
So
the name itself is not unique to me, but when you're calling me this name, it's supposed to refer to the one unique me.
okay, gotcha. I would say very, very, very. Okay, sure. So the vast majority of identities are group identities because they're going to be. You agree with that, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, sure. So
And
let's.
I would say, going back to the libertarian example, if I may just butt in just really
No, go
quickly,
for
I
it.
would say the libertarian example, as in the idea of what is a libertarian, is a good example of a weak group identity, a group identity with a weak, um,
This come.
with a weak common denominator.
Can you
And I
think
would
of
say that
any
sex
identity?
has such a weak human, has such, I would say that sex itself has such a weak common denominator. It's really just a cluster of characteristics, not even a group identity at that point.
When you say sex, I don't know if you're referring to the biological aspect of like comprised of.
I'm saying your reproductive system, the how your body is structured, and it's not binary. Sex is not binary. We know that.
Sure, but
Um,
that's got way
um,
more of a through line than almost any other categories. Like we can get 99.5% of the population just based off of chromosomes, right? Like that's got a pretty stark through line than most categories.
that is true. However, I would still argue that sex itself has even because the amount like how common it is like oh most people are not intersex, the commonness is not related to
Okay,
how strong
can you
the
give me any like group identity that just has a common denominator that's strong? That like when you say strong, you just mean we wouldn't be able to find exceptions for these people. They're a part of this community, and if you're a part of this community, you have it. I don't think there's any identity that would.
doctors have a really strong common denominator, and that is a PhD. Passing a degree in college for 6 years,
Sure,
getting a PhD is a pretty
I
strong common
wouldn't,
denominator for
but I wouldn't call
doctors.
that a group identity. I would call that like that feels more of like a political group for a specific reason as to hey, we can
It's
trust
a
these
group
people. Yeah, but I wouldn't
it's
call
a
that an.
group, and we identify
Okay,
them as doctors
sure.
because they all have the common denominator of a PhD, which I don't really want to argue if that's a group identity or not. I would say at least we can agree that's a group. I would just say that's a group identity because each group has their members, and the membership is the identity.
Okay, sure. But okay,
That's group
what
identity.
I'll say is when it comes to a lot like any group community where you are just sort of like finding these people who agree with you, there's never going to be any sort of common denominator, right? When it comes to like communities that sort of, and I think that sort of the best way
It depends how
generally.
you define it. Remember, the definition, how universal the definition makes it easier. If the definition is not very universal at all, then it depends on who you're speaking
Yeah, I
to. And
agree.
really
We should
that's
we
just
should
kind of like
have
a that's a fracture of
we should
language.
have we should
But
have
that's not necessarily go ahead.
sorry, I keep cutting you off, but like I generally when it comes down to it, when it like comes down to who we should exclude and who we should include, generally that's best done within the communities. And I do think that the trans community has excluded some members of themselves, like some members of their community, to make sure, like, oh hey, let's just make sure that we're talking about the right people and the like the proper categories here. And generally, the
That's
communities are good with
interesting
that.
because that's interesting because from my perspective, the trans community says the only thing you need to be trans is to say that you are, is to say
Sure,
that I self-identify as a transgender.
but it
And
depends.
I'm making the argument that when the requirement cannot be just to self-identify, because you're basically saying at that point to identify, you must identify. That doesn't make sense.
Sure, I'm fine. I'm fine with saying, you know what, maybe self ID is kind of a weird way to describe a group. But like, have you ever heard of like performance theory of gender?
Is that like how gender relates to the role and expectations you have
Yeah,
on
yeah,
society?
essentially, and how people perceive you.
I do like to explore that, and this is actually this is how I like to distinctly separate sex from gender. I would like to see sex as in, your reproductive system, how your body is
Sure.
organized, and gender is assigning a societal class to you based and then setting expectations of sexual and reproductive.
Hey, you cut out. You there? Hello. Um.
As I stated before,
Hey, sorry, you there?
I think sex itself has lacks a common
Hey, can you hear me?
denominator, but assigned sex at birth does actually have a common denominator.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? Was I just talking into the void?
You cut out for just half a second. So
I think
essentially,
my
what I
phone
heard,
turned off.
your phone turned off, is what you said.
I think my screen just kind of just like, because I haven't touched it in a while.
Sure. Okay, so I'm totally fine with this differentiation. This is how I use it as well, where basically there's a difference between sex and gender. Sex is the biological component. Gender is the social. They obviously relate to each other in sort of like significant ways, but we can separate them that way. What was your point about that?
I think my point was just simply just saying there's a difference.
There is a yeah, sure. I agree. I recognize that there is a difference between sex and gender for sure.
I feel like this is why this conversation will probably be more unique than other conversations you've had because I would think that I have a position that is fairly not left or right. It's not one side or the other.
Yeah,
In
because
fact, I
you
would consider
also
myself a gender abolitionist.
yeah, but you also mentioned that children shouldn't be on an HRT, which is a very I don't know why you get that to that place.
Now, that is more something I need to explore myself, and that may not be a debate if we get into that. That might be you just educating me. Because
Sure.
what I see it is that hormone blockers, do you want to get into that?
Yeah, no, I mean whatever you want to, but like I think that sounds like our that I'm very strong on like HRT for children.
I feel like we've been kind of getting into a circle. Let's spice it up a bit.
Sure.
So, um, I would say it does not make sense to call hormone blockers reversible when I feel like starting like for example if you took like an age stopper an age like you stop like physically aging
Hmm.
and then you start physically aging at your age of 27 but you're still like a child. I feel like that's not healthy, and I still think I'm not saying the ban hormone blockers. I'm saying that I see a lot that like this is like an encouraged solution
Hmm.
when this should probably be more like a last resort or many sessions of therapy.
So I wouldn't
I
I
am just highly skeptical. And one more thing is just,
yeah
I'm sorry that I've talked a
no
lot, but
you're
I
good
just want to say one more thing.
yeah
I'm also highly skeptical of the American Healthcare Association. Naturally, as a libertarian and, looking into our modern day healthcare system. I don't like the AMA, and I don't like how they have a monopoly over the licensing practices, most licensing practices on doctors. And I feel like that they're perhaps in not just hormone blockers, but in many situations that doctors feel like they can't actually express what their professional opinion is because they feel like they'd be threatened by the AMA to revoke their license.
Sure. Um, okay, so a couple things there. I do think that you have a couple good points here, and the first couple good points is that the hormone replacement therapy should be like a last resort. It should be like, hey, let's make sure that you go to therapy. Let's make sure that we talk about why exactly you're feeling this way. And I talked to a detransitioner. Are you familiar with that term? It's like basically someone who went on HRT
Yeah.
and then reversed. Yeah, and she was saying like
Yeah.
she was saying that when she went to therapy basically for the first time, they basically just handed her like HRT, and she's just like, oh, okay, great, I'll take that. What I will say is one, that is not the vast majority of the experience of the trans people that I've talked to, and two, if that's happening, that's fucked. Okay, we should definitely go through like the proper, because like HRT is a big deal, and we should have informed consent for our patients. We should have the children
And
should understand, the parents should understand that this isn't a simple process, and this is something that we should not be taking lightly. But I think when it
that's
comes,
hormone replacement theory. I was also talking about hormone blockers.
hormone
I was
blockers
also just
are a
I
subset
was
of HRT.
skeptical. Say again?
HRT is
Oh,
hormone blockers are a subset of HRT, generally speaking.
all right, because I was thinking of HRT because HRT stands for hormone replacement
Replacement, yeah,
therapy,
I
and
understand.
hormone
It's
blockers is not a that's a confusion. But I think we can actually agree. I don't think we actually have any qualms about this.
yeah,
I
but
would say, however, from the community, they say that like hormone blockers are not reverse or are reversible, and I'm just skeptical. Are you sure? Does it sound like it?
that
Anyways, that's it.
sorry. What I will say is I've looked. There's a lot of different research, and there's not enough research, because a lot of the research is kind of it sways a little bit based on who they're doing it, and it's not comprehensive enough. And I do think that we definitely need more studies, more information on it. But there's
Also,
no
for
other
like
way
just
to.
a short time. Like a short time, like this is obviously a recent development, and we can't like explore really a good set amount of people who are like 70 years old who started HRT when they were 13. We can't really study that yet.
Uh,
So
right,
I,
but
I'm
the
I'm saying I'm saying that right now it wouldn't make sense that there would not be that much research about it because it's kind of new.
yeah, 100%.
Maybe not the drug itself, but like the
100%.
use of it right
So
now.
what I will say is that generally speaking, as long as you don't take a significant amount and that you reverse the processes, generally, like obviously if you wait until you're 26, that's going to be a big deal for sure. But what I will definitely say is that does not seem to be the majority of the cases of the people who end up not taking HRT. And what I will say is I think that we definitely need to recognize that a huge majority of the people who are a huge majority of the people who are taking HRT are feeling suicidal, are feeling incredibly desperate about the way that they feel and the way that their body looks. And I think that if we can alleviate that tension, that's something that we should advocate for.
Yeah, I think that part has like because if I haven't gone into this about like because I was talking about how not all trans people can be valid linguistically, but then I was also going to go about how it works in our current gender system, the rules of our current gender system, if you could say there is like a rule book, but I'm not saying that. But point is I'm also would go farther to say the skepticalness of transitioning partly stems back to the idea that sex does not have a common denominator. So the idea of transitioning to another sex violates premises two of my line of logic. So, anyways, what I was saying is that like it's have you heard of like the story of like Don Quixote?
Yeah,
It's a Spanish story about like a knight.
yeah, and it fights
Maybe this example has been used
windmills.
about it's like yeah, it's like for my perspective that I don't really think trans people can be valid. At least not all of them can be.
Sure, but
And so for
you
someone,
acknowledge,
and I don't want,
but you
go ahead.
acknowledge what you acknowledge what you're essentially saying, right? Is that who is not valid to you are people who don't perform as women in society, right? That like it's the
No,
people
not
who sort of
perform.
just
I actually, it's a good. That's actually an important distinction. I don't think that I don't think it would be in case in historically at really, except for a colloquial sense, that you're a woman because of the way you act. I would actually go back to you're a woman because of your assigned sex at birth,
isn't
which
that
does
it,
have a common
I
denominator.
thought that we were clarifying a huge difference between sex and gender. Like if you acknowledge that gender is a social
Of course,
understanding,
yes.
why are you coupling them back together?
Because, well, how it stands in our current society today, as I have observed, that gender, the group identity, gender is assigned to your based on your assigned sex at birth. Your gender depends on your assigned sex at birth.
Why would
This
you
goes back to my premises that your gender depends on some sort of requirement.
wait? Why
And
would
it
you
just so
say
happens that I look at, go ahead.
why would you say that gender is dependent on sex when there are people who of both sexes who fall into a specific gender who fall into complete? And I guess I just maybe don't understand what you're referring to when you say gender, because I thought we had a collective understanding that essentially
I,
it's a
yeah,
maybe you deal with performance, maybe it's about
I actually I wrote down my definitions right here. If you want
yeah.
me to like
I'd like to
say
hear the one
what
about
gender
gender because
is,
I'm
and
lost.
not specifically sex itself, but assigned sex at birth, which I think is different. So I would say gender is a societal class for the functional purpose of upholding class members' sexual and reproductive roles, norms, and traits assigned by one's assigned sex at birth. And I would say assigned sex at birth is a reproductive identification characterized by one's structural reproductive body type developed prenatally. Developed prenatally means, before
Before
you were
birth,
born.
yeah. Um,
Exactly.
okay, so I don't understand. Okay, so okay, I have a question. Okay,
Go ahead.
are you familiar with any like sort of trans individuals? Like I can say like
Like
Caitlyn Jenner.
personally in real
No,
life
just
or like on online?
you're familiar with Caitlyn Jenner, right?
Yeah, Caitlyn Jenner, the Republican
Yeah.
political
What is
guy.
her
No,
gender?
Caitlyn Jenner was also, on Keeping Up with the Kardashians. No, wait.
Yeah. It doesn't matter. What is
Yeah.
her gender?
Okay, yeah. You're talking about my personal opinion?
Yes.
Man.
Your person, man. Okay, gotcha. So I guess what is the benefit of this category when it seems like there is no real substantial difference? Can you describe what the substantial difference is between someone like between what I'm going to call a transgender woman and a cis woman? It seems like
So
it's
I
just the
would say
like the fact that they can reproduce.
I would say a cis woman, their desired gender, what they want to be, is what they are already, and a
Yes.
transgender person is what their desired gender is not what they are.
Okay. Sure. I'm fine with that. So
Not, not that sounds
what
that
would we
sounds
call
quite
that?
mean, but I
What would we
go
call
ahead.
that gender that they aspire to be?
We could call that self-identification, although I would say that in order to really identify, you need to justify your claim. Really, self-identification is just I
Okay, here
desire to be
let me
that.
justify the claim then. When there are way different ways that that we treat men and women in society, right? Like you
Yes.
understand there's like social and economic and physiological differences that we would say we treat men and we treat women in different ways in our society, right? We tell women to sort of get in the corner. We tell men to like be aggressive and be hyper or like and the way that they get flirted on and interacted with in society is completely different, right? Not completely different, but definitely different, right?
Yes, our
Okay,
current gender binary acts like that.
right. Okay, so here's the question, right? Caitlyn Jenner, if she just or if there's just a trans woman who no one knows that she's trans and she goes into a
Yeah.
bar and people just perceive
Hmm.
her as a woman even though her assigned sex at birth was male. How is she any
Yeah.
different from the cis woman that is also at the bar? It seems like there's that there is not this meaningful similarities between her and men, but there is a meaningful similarity between her and women.
So what I would say to that, if I was in that bar, I wouldn't know.
Right.
because the transgender person is basically in a disguise. It's a costume,
Okay.
essentially, as a functional
But
purpose.
you just
I wouldn't know because it would be like for example, if I see a police officer, but he's not actually a police officer, it's just a guy wearing a badge, but is not working with the police department. But
sure.
I thought it was a police officer.
Sure.
It's called a costume. It's a you know what I mean? It's a
Yeah,
costume.
no, I get what you're saying, but also policeman means a lot. Like, policeman has all of these hard grounded realities, and I just want to describe the way that we treat each other in society. So, whatever word we want to use, it seems like it's really important. It seems like we have like completely warped our society around these two structures of we treat like people in category A in some way and people in category B in some way, and it seems like people who are assigned like that sex does not make a meaningful difference, but instead how they're perceived in society. So I don't understand why we're calling them a man or like in dress up in costume when it feels like the entire category is basically a costume.
What I would say, okay, so again, I would talk about if I would talk about assigned sex at birth, but I will like to clarify before I talk about
And
that
costume is a
I
strong word.
agree.
Okay, go ahead.
Perhaps it is a strong word. It was just a word that I thought of at the time. Maybe I could
No, no,
use a
no.
different word.
I use
And
that word, and I kind of want to re-clarify that I kind of mean it as well. Performance is what I would use. So I guess costume is okay.
the function of gender itself, not sex, even though I would say that your gender identity is based on your assigned sex at birth, the gender part itself is just a performance, it's just expectations. And that's why I believe that why should we treat other people differently? And this is where we're going to really agree because I would not say there's any meaningful beneficial function to a gender in a society.
I would.
However, if we are, and I hold up, wait, if we are going to play by gender's rules, if we're going to say that, oh, I am a woman, I am a man, or whatever you say, if we're going to play by gender's rules, we're going to play by gender's rules. And I would say because LGBTQ plus spaces don't play by gender's rules, they're effectively genderless. LGBTQ plus spaces are genderless
No, but
because yeah, they refer to
you're
themselves by man and
you're
woman, but these are
operating
zombie
but
words.
you're operating with a definition that is also zombified and also like it doesn't feel like here's what I would say.
Okay.
The way that you describe gender feels completely at
Hmm.
odds with how most people use the word gender. And when I use the word gender, I'm just using it as like a social construction of ways that we are treating people. Now, if you want to
Oh, I
like,
agree.
okay, so how then is a trans woman not a woman? If they are being
Because
treated
gender
in
aside,
society, if they are being
remember
treated
when you were
in,
talking about remember when you were talking about how if it looks like that sex and gender is intertwined in some way at the beginning of the stream? Remember that?
yeah,
It's because you assign the expectations, the societal class, gender, based on your assigned sex at birth.
no,
That's how it's assigned.
oh, wait, I guess, but you can break away from those expectations, no problem.
Now, actually, remember my first premise? I didn't, this is how I observe how our gender binary works today. I'm saying any gender system, not even like even a gender binary, does not necessarily have to work like that. This is just how it works right now.
Okay, gotcha. How is your definition of gender any different from sex?
So, well, wait,
Are
did you
there any
pause?
males who are not men in your
Are we
system?
so let's say let's clarify when we're gonna say male and female,
I
we're
mean
referring
sex.
to assigned sex at birth.
I'm
Okay, because
I don't
so yeah, any male, any AMAB would be a man, and any AFAB would be a
so
female.
there is no
The
difference between sex
AMAB,
and gender?
the male is your reproductive body. The gender is the expectations set upon you.
But
You're a
what if
male because you have the
so
reproductive
okay, gotcha.
body.
So
You're
so
a
what you're
man
saying
because we assigned this expectations on
so
you.
what you're saying is gender in your system because you grew up in a way that you are like all those cluster of characteristics. Basically, you're saying it's not whether or not you fall into it, it's whether or not as a child arbitrarily you were given those expectations.
I wouldn't say this would be my system. This is not the system I agree with.
But
This is
this
the
is how you're
system
using the word
today
gender.
that I
This is how you're using
observe.
the word gender. I'm not saying this is your
Yeah.
This is how you use the word gender and you use the word sex. I'm not saying that this is your perfect system. When I say your system, I'm just saying this is the way that you use those words, because that's not how I use the words. Those words. I use the word gender in the way more meaningful way, and I think that I think, which is how do we interact with these people in society? How do we treat them?
That is what gender is.
No,
I
but
feel like
it's
there's a
not.
confusion
No,
because
because you don't use that term that way. You use it based off of the expectations they had as a child, even if they break away from it, because you don't consider Caitlyn
no,
Jenner a
the
woman.
expectations is permanent. They're assigned with it
No, they're
because
not.
of something that
No,
happened to them
because here's the thing.
prenatally.
Here's the thing. Absolutely not. Because if you had some uh like are you familiar with Buck Angel? Like just some like
I am.
okay,
In
gotcha.
fact, I just recently watched an interview with him.
Yeah, gotcha. If he went into a woman's bathroom, or if he started putting on a dress, or if he started like flirting with 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 men in a very like effeminate way, you would be like,
Hmm.
whoa, 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 those are not my expectations that I have of that person. Those are completely not what I expect from a person who looks like that, from a man who looks like that.
Because in my mind, I perceive Buck Angel as a man. Well, as I stated before, that's not true. It's a costume. Just like
But
if
what
I were
is
to somehow, just like wait, remember, just like if I were to somehow go outdoors right now dressed and looks like a woman, like just looks like a woman, and
sure,
everybody looked at me as like, oh, that's a her, and everybody thought I was a woman, but it's
right?
not true. I'm a man. I
But
can't change that. I'm just wearing a costume.
right.
I'm going against the expectations of what I would look like as a man because the gender is just assigning the expectations.
Yeah, but if gender is just assigning those expectations, then aren't the expectations being changed as soon as you go out looking like a woman?
The expectations are going against what I am. Because remember, I'm a man, I'm expected to act like a man. When I go out to society and I act like a woman, people may say, "Oh, like for example, there could be two ways. Oh, you're supposed to act like a man," or people are fooled enough to think that that I am a woman when I'm not.
But I
They're
just
fooled. There's like that's
I,
because the purpose of gender is to make this like the sexes look different because the sexes are not really that different if you have an androgynous society, and so we want to make a
jeez.
distinction between a mother and a father and a man and a woman because it's just some stupid reason. I don't like gender, so
Sure, but I don't understand if you don't like gender, why are you arbitrating such a difference between these two? Like I don't understand why you're calling it a costume when you're saying that you recognize that these decisions are arbitrary. Does that make sense?
yeah, like the assign yeah, because I'm talking about if we play by gender's rules, we're gonna play by gender's rules. The LGBTQ plus spaces are not, and effectively they're in a genderless society. Currently, as I see it, our society is fractured with the LGBTQ plus movement fracturing society into a gender society and a genderless society. Yes, we still use the words man and woman and LGBTQ plus spaces, but effectively they're not words because they're not backed up by rational definitions.
But when we
And
say
so
rational definitions, I don't I think that we have this sort of like idea of definitions. Like they're so hard and they're
I
so
do. I made a list about it
yeah,
at the beginning of the stream.
yeah, but that's not how anyone operates with definitions. That's not how anyone operates with language, and we don't consult dictionaries
I
every time we
disagree.
have a conversation. How would you
I disagree. It's called the law of non-contradiction. For example, going back to premises two, a transition from A to B must mean A does
yeah,
not
but that's
equal
not
B, and
what
that applies universally.
what I'm saying is that anytime like it seems like you are very stuck into one idea of one definition, and that's not how people use the word definite. That's not how people
Oh, can I
interact with.
clarify
Yeah, go ahead.
something?
Yeah,
I'm observing now. Let's just say my definition is wrong. I'm just observing what I see historically and what our current society stands right now. My original argument does not even imply a definition. It just says if there's a word, there's a definition, and this is what happens when there's a definition. I could let you have the floor and define gender however you want. You will still invalidate some trans people just by the nature of defining gender.
I
And
don't
that's
think
my
so
central
because I
argument.
no because what I would say is it's a collection of a multitude of different characteristics, none of which are required, all of which are oh fuck, what's the opposite of required? It's sufficient. All of which are
Not
sufficient.
required.
No, sorry, I meant in the philosophical. It's fine.
Okay.
The all of which are sufficient, and I don't think that anytime we use those terms, there are any trans women or trans men who would be excluded from those categories based off of that definition. However, when you use it as a very clinical or like sexual or like here are the expectations that you get put aside.
Wait,
on,
can you go back to that? Like,
yeah.
so just say what you just said again. So I don't know.
I
Like
consider
a couple sentences back.
You're good.
Go ahead.
I consider gender like a collection of characteristics. You can look at there are some of them are social. For example, having long hair, shaving your legs.
I have a question.
Wearing pink.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's kind of all that I needed. So what I'm getting from you is that maybe this is not be right, but like just colloquially, if it looks like a man, it's a man. If it looks like a woman, it's a woman. Is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily, but I would say because there's hold on one second. I actually
Because when you're saying like
No, I
that,
see
like
what
it
you're
doesn't
saying.
feel
Because
right. It doesn't feel right that Buck Angel would be a woman because Buck Angel looks like a man, or the other example with Caitlyn Jenner. You're kind of saying like what is a man and what is a woman if it meets the certain requirements to look like a woman.
not
Which that's a different. Okay, go ahead.
Because here's an example that I would use, right? Because I had a
Okay.
roommate who was a male roommate, cis, 100%. He had a very high pitched voice, right? And every time he went into the drive-through, people just assumed that he was a woman, right? And he went through the drive-through, and then people would get like, they would be like, oh shit,
Give
I
him the
didn't realize
Barbie
that was a
toy.
man. Huh? Oh, sort of.
Give him
Yeah.
the Barbie toy.
Basically, I understand that there is some sort of like, yeah, that person is being treated like a woman, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a woman. But I guess what I'm saying is any definition that we use are gonna have weird exceptions. And I gave the exception to you when you had your like it's just assigned sex at birth because I look at someone like David what was the do you remember the name?
That was the John Money kid. Damon Reinhardt or something.
Yeah,
the John Money kid.
Yeah.
Like, I think we talked about it in DMs.
Yeah. What would you not consider? How would you consider this person? Would you consider this person a woman?
Yeah.
You would consider this person a woman, someone who has XY.
I mean, obviously it's unfortunate child abuse what happened to him, but yeah, she's a woman.
Why would you? Okay,
no, wait. This is going back. If we change the definition, if we like change the definition of gender to include David Reinhardt or whatever as a man,
yeah,
it would still, my line of logic would still apply that some trans people would have to be excluded.
Yeah, but that's
not
my point. Is everyone's going to be excluded if we take such a rigid use of definitions at any point, anytime, ever?
It doesn't even have to be.
Every definition that we use, if we use such a rigid, strict use of definitions, because like it's the same way that I used it, where I said, let's look at the definition of sandwich. Shit, Uncrustables are no longer a sandwich because it's one piece of bread and not two pieces of bread. How in the world? We would all consider that sandwiches, but that's not how we use definitions. That shouldn't be how we use definitions. We don't have this rigid, static, like
Can we look at something? Let's go back to libertarian. Libertarian is not a rigid definition.
Yes.
And with that, it's not even if you were to get a definition, it would not even be universally defined. And so I'm not saying that a definition has to be rigid. The weaker the definition, the weaker the word is in general, and so the weaker the meaning of what a libertarian is.
No such...
in a first way, let me finish. In effect, the opposite is true. The stricter the definition, the we know more about it, like doctors. But necessarily, if you have any degree, the weakest definition, the weakest requirements, the loosest to the strictest, you would have to exclude some trans people.
Yes, but that's how every definition works, where if you take a rigid way of looking at something, it's going to...
There is something... We may it may be loose, it may be loose what is a libertarian, but we know there is libertarians and non-libertarians,
Yes,
and
and we
there
know
is
what.
something
Yes, and
that differentiates between them, and
yes,
that
but
goes for gender too.
we also recognize that there is some people in between libertarians and non-libertarians where it kind of just depends on who you ask, right? Do
And
you agree
yeah,
with that?
exactly. It depends. Wait, I agree.
Okay,
That's if yeah, it
and that's
depends on who you
and
ask.
you would even say the same thing for
Wait, let me
doctors.
finish.
Okay,
Let me finish.
sure.
When you ask somebody, and the definition is not universal, so when you ask somebody their definition, the requirements change, and that's very real. Requirements change from person to person, but there has to be requirements in a group identity. You ask somebody, you ask somebody to define gender, they're going to set up requirements, and that it's going to exclude some trans
But
people.
you're gonna see weird shit like that even with when it comes to
Let's go
doctors.
back to the
Because wait, hold on.
Lunchables.
Sorry,
Can
I'm gonna
I
just
can I
no.
go back to
I'm
lunch?
gonna fix
Okay,
this
go
real
ahead.
quick.
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Sure.
When it comes to doctors, because if you look at someone who has like a doctorate of fine arts, would you consider that person a doctor? Because if you say I need a
I
doctor,
would.
but like you understand that that's not socially how we use the word doctor. Generally speaking,
Well,
if
when
you're
we
saying
say I need a doctor, we're referring to a medical doctor,
that's
which
my
is just like we shorten it down to just a doctor.
yes, but that's
So
my
when we
point is
say,
when
like,
we
for
use
example,
these
a
words, we're
ward,
using
a
shorthands
ward
all the
can have
time.
mental. So we could either say that there's like because words have more than one definition depending how we use them. So when we say doctor, it could mean anybody with a PhD, it could be anybody with a medical PhD, or it could be just somebody who practiced medicine. For example, like the TF2 doctor, I think he got his medical license revoked. We still call him the doctor because he still practiced medicine. So it depends on the
Wait, we would still
definition and
call
it
a
depends
doctor
on who you
if they
ask.
got their medicine. Oh, you're saying it depends on who you ask, because some people would say that they would, and some people they wouldn't, right?
Because we call the doctor in TF2 the doctor, even though he doesn't actually have a PhD. He practiced medicine. So that's just a different definition for the same word. Does
Right,
that
but
make sense?
wouldn't you say that that person did not meet the requirement of doctor, and yet we call them a doctor? That this is my point. That definitions every time we use them.
Remember what I said. It depends on the definition. If we were going to go by the definition, you need a PhD. The doctor in TF2 is not a doctor. But if we were going to say a doctor is somebody who practiced medicine, we would say the doctor from TF2 is a doctor.
Yeah, but
So it
like
depends on the definition.
it depends on the definition is the same thing as
And
what I'm
depending
saying,
on the
which is it
definition
depends
of
on who we
gender,
ask.
we could include Buck Angel as a man, depending on the definition.
I
My
just
definition, what I said, does not necessarily have to be right.
what I will say here is that for anyone who doesn't know who David Reimer is, he's essentially he's the John Money kid. I'll just explain it for essentially the audience or for anyone watching. He is a kid who had a botched circumcision, and his penis was essentially completely cut off, and the psychologist was like, okay, well, gender is a social construct. We're just going to treat this person like a woman. He's going to grow up like a girl, and essentially he had depression his entire life. He had suicide feelings. He transitioned out. He started identifying as a man when he was like 16 or something like that. The realization that he was not a girl crystallized between the ages of 9 and 11 years old, and he went on tour and started talking about the important his experiences, and then he killed himself due to just like an immense amount of depression for feeling gendered the wrong way.
Oh,
And you would say that
I
that
forgot
person,
that context.
yeah, when you would call
Sorry,
that
now you're
person a
reminding me
she,
the
right?
story.
Yeah.
No, actually, now I would call that person a he. I forgot that context because he was assigned male at birth.
No,
Anyways, so I forgot
he
that
was
context.
assigned female
Anyways,
at birth. He was saying
no,
he
that wouldn't make any sense. You said they cut off his dick. You would be assigned male at birth.
but they treated him like a woman. They had the expectation. He grew up as a girl.
You say grow up like a girl, but you're not saying he is a girl or like he
But
was
that
a girl at that
all
time.
when I
You're saying
use
he grew up. You said he grew up like a girl,
he grew
implying that
up
he's not a
being
girl.
no. He grew up. Well, one, I would not say that that person is a girl. I would say that that person is a man. What I would say is that this person was treated and by society at large as a girl. It to fill that
Because they didn't know his assigned sex at birth.
what, but like, what is assigned sex at birth if not this person?
Let me pull up my definition. What I wrote down for
Okay.
assigned sex at birth: a reproductive identification characterized by one's structural reproductive body type developed prenatally.
That person.
That's why I can still be. That's why I can still be a man with my dick chopped off right now because I had a dick prenatally.
Okay. Would you say that like a person with um like XXY, like Turner syndrome, essentially, who doesn't have like a womb or like reproductive organs, essentially, but still comes out, everything looks fine, and would say, "Oh, okay, this person is a girl, assigned gender at birth, assigned sex at birth, girl, female. Let's go ahead and that seems good to me." And it's not until much later that it turns out, oh shit, she actually can't even ovulate, can't reproduce in any sort of way. Is this person's sex female? Is this person's assigned sex female?
I'm not a doctor.
No,
However,
but this is
if
my
I
point.
and I
This is my
don't,
point, is that we can find weird exceptions every time you sort of like try to really nail down a definition. You're still gonna
we
get
would
weird
call
shit.
it if we were to truly call somebody like if we're gonna say somebody's intersex, I would just say they're non-binary. If they were assigned intersex at birth, we would just call them non-binary.
No, we wouldn't, because
That would be
gender
the
and
logical
sex are different
conclusion.
things. We would say that person is an
Remember,
intersex
we
woman.
assigned gender identity based on somebody's assigned sex at birth.
But I don't prescribe to that. I don't think that anyone
Now
who
you don't
studies
have
gender,
to.
okay, sure.
You don't have to.
I'm
This
saying
is the definition
that is your definition. Yeah. 100%.
Sure. And remember, my main argument is that if you hear my door open, close this because I'm trying to get air in my car. Anyways,
Sure.
I'm saying that any definition, linguistically, any definition that follows that A does not equal B would mean that not all trans people can be valid.
But I guess
Any
what
definition.
I'm saying is that's every category. Every single category that you would ever create, you're going to get in this weird circumstances where, oh shit, there's a minority of people, about 1%, 2%, maybe less, maybe more. There's going to be a minority of people who we would want to call these people in this definition, but they don't belong to that definition if we look at it stringently, if we look at it strictly. Because your definition, you're going to get weird offshoots like Turner syndrome, and my definition, you're going to get weird definitions when it comes to like my roommate who's being perceived as a woman but is a man. So like I feel uncomfortable with that one too. Maybe self-identifying
there would
makes
be a
lot of sense.
non-binary category. Somebody, because necessarily
Would you-
we forgot to talk about group C. Just because it's group A and group B does not necessarily that there has to be only those two categories. We live in a very strict gender binary, and so when there is intersex people, we would like to put them in a box, but that doesn't make any sense. It does not make any functional sense. There would have to be something that is not a sandwich, but not a sandwich, and we call that non-binary.
No, because if you look at an Uncrustable, would you call that not a sandwich because it doesn't meet that strict definition? But because we kind of consider it a sandwich, it's not a sandwich, but it's not a sandwich. That's a weird way of describing language. I don't think anyone would ever.
It depends on the definition. If we were going to get definition one,
but that's not.
If we were to get definition one of a sandwich, let me finish. If we were going to get definition one of a sandwich, we would say a crustable is a sandwich. If we were going to get definition two of a sandwich, we would say the crustable is not a sandwich. This goes back to the TF2 doctor.
But this
whatever the definition the different definition means what you're referring is different.
But like here's I guess what I'm saying is we don't ever just have a rigid idea of what a definition is. The definitions come after we construct the idea. Like if I ask you what a sandwich is, the way that you determine what a sandwich is, you don't have this strict idea and then you go, okay, let me put it into my little mental map. Does it meet these specific criterias? Okay, no,
it goes both ways actually.
What?
It goes both ways. I'm saying it goes both ways. We construct definitions. Listen, we construct definitions by observing the world and then categorizing things. Yes. And then when we meet other things, we have the definitions with us already to categorize it. So it actually goes both ways.
If you ask any person, is an Uncrustable a sandwich? They would go, yeah, duh, of course. Yeah.
Their definition of a sandwich.
No, it doesn't depend on your definition of sandwich. Everyone would categorize that. The definition is incomplete.
Their definition makes inclusion the Uncrustable.
The dictionary's definition is lacking.
The dictionary's definition, remember,
that's not how
if we look up the dictionary definition of a libertarian and you ask a libertarian, they may be like, No, I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
Yes, the dictionary makes definitions more universal, but it cannot make any word completely
But here's
universal.
my
There will
thing:
be a
is that
disagreement.
definition isn't accurate to anyone. It's just a loose idea to get a basic idea of what kind of is a sandwich. Okay, here's kind of the idea of a sandwich. This is the basic category of it, but that's not it. We don't like set up these like hard
Oh,
lines when it comes to definitions
I
ever.
agree. Sometimes we have words that are loose.
No,
And
we never have words that are strict.
sure, you can say you say there's something that is stricter, but you could
Sure,
say that there's nothing that is completely strict. I agree with that.
sure. So I guess
So when you make
so
something more, when
here's
you
my
make
point.
something more strict, wait,
Okay.
when you make something more strict, when you make something more strict, you make the gap of non-binary smaller. Doesn't necessarily have to be a binary, but you know what I mean. The thing that is sort of that is something is like it's not a sandwich, but it's not a sandwich. That would be called the non-binary.
No, but
And
like
so when you make the definition stricter,
so
you
here's
make that
so
gap
here's my
smaller.
question, right? Would you consider something a non-binary sandwich if one person is just like, no, I don't think that's a sandwich?
Well, that's because their definition is
Yeah,
like
but
because
like,
this
no, no,
again,
no,
this
no,
is
no.
a whole semantical debate.
Yes, I agree. I agree. But okay, I have okay.
I'm
I have a
sorry.
question.
You
I
know
have a
what? Do you
question.
want to take
If
like
you agree,
a tiny break?
no,
Because I feel
I'm
like I'm going a little bit insane in this hot car.
okay. If you want to take a break, that's fine.
How was your day? I just feel like
Oh
it's a
yeah,
little heated, and without a moderator, there's like no
sure,
moderator to
sure.
moderate us.
Here's what I'll say. I feel okay. If you're doing this for me, I'm totally good. But yeah, I my day's going great, man. How you doing?
I bought a shirt today. I
You
bought
bought a
a
shirt?
$80 shirt and it looks good. Yeah.
You bought an $80
Wait, let me
shirt?
turn on my camera and show it. It might look like that I'm a little sweaty because of this car. Summer.
Nice.
It's my shirt right now.
Very good. That's $80?
All It's a pretty good fabric.
Yeah,
I say
feels
it was
good.
worth it.
Nice.
Yeah, it feels good. Nice, weighty, a little silky.
Hmm.
So I guess let's get back into it. What were we
Yeah,
talking
sure.
about?
Here's my question. If you recognize that
Mhm.
there are not ever strict definitions, then why would you get so frustrated when it feels like there are trans people that you can find who wouldn't be valid if we use a strict definition? Because it
I remember I said before there is such thing as non-binary. That is a thing. And no matter how loose or how strict the definition of gender is, there will be some people, as you said, that is like you're not a woman, but you're not a woman. Just like again, the sandwich or the doctor thing. So that would necessarily be a category of non-binary. And I would say that would be people who are intersex, but that's my definition.
right. But sorry. Let me repeat my question because maybe I let me restate my question because maybe it was misunderstood. Um, so um, my question is, if you recognize the definitions are not strict, okay, you said that there is a linguistic error or something because it seems like there are trans people who would not be valid. Wouldn't you say that about all definitions, considering you recognize that all definitions are not going to be strict? That there's going to be some loosey goosey ishness when it comes to any category that we create. There's going to be some blurs along the lines. So if you want to point to that line, that blur, and say, "Hey, it looks like this category is invalid," you could do that with every category that exists in the human in the
What does that
English
mean?
language.
Oh, what I was saying that when you do like so for example, the you could say that like the less strict the definition is, you could say the weaker the definition is. And the weakest a definition can be is no definition at all. And I would say that when you say I identify because I identify, that is just not a definition at all. And if it's not a definition, it's not actually a word. And so I would say then in LGBTQ plus spaces, there is no such thing as gender.
Okay, if you want to just say maybe self ID is not the best way to operate within spaces, like I
It's
kind
just
of
does not operate at all.
I kind of agree with you because I think I mean I prescribe to a performative sense of gender that like if the community if the way that you are perceived at large by society is a certain way that you generally are that certain way, and that's a very performative way of looking at gender, and not everyone agrees with me, but would you say that that's linguistically an issue, and if not, why wouldn't you ascribe to my position? No one is here. Okay. I don't know where he went. We'll give him some time. We'll give him some space. Um, yeah. I don't know. I can pull up his manifesto as well. Um, let's see here. I think I can bring it up here actually, because it was in our chat. Here. This is terrible. Hold on one second. Wow, I'm so bad at this. I am so bad at this. Give me 1 second while I figure this out. Jesus Christ. I'm gonna nail this one day. I'm a little bad at this. Let me figure out the best way to do this. Here's what I'm gonna say. I'm just gonna go ahead and pull it up on Discord. Tech difficulties, IDK, what happened? Can you give me a minute? No problem, man. No problem. Hey, you back?
I'm here.
Hello.
Sorry for the technical difficulties. I think my internet
Oh,
just
how
pooped,
dare
so
you,
I'm just
man.
gonna go. I just retreated up to upstairs. If you hear little voices in the background, that's my brother yelling on his
No
video game.
worries.
We're
No
rooms right
worries.
next to each other.
What's he playing? What's he like? What's he enjoy?
Oh, let me go ask him. Hey Owen, what you playing?
Fall Guys.
He's playing Fall Guys. I haven't heard that name in a long time.
Fall Guys. Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah,
Surprised it still
we've
gets
been kind of
traffic.
renovating our rooms, and so he moved. This room that I'm in was his PC room, and now
Mhm.
there's not a PC in it because he moved his PC to my PC spot, and all of the rooms in here are like really small, so there's just no more space for my PC.
Gotcha. Um, okay, gotcha. So if you, I guess my question. So here, sorry. You cut off. Did you hear my question at the end of it? I can repeat it.
No, I think I was in the middle of talking, and then I
Oh, okay.
realized, wait a minute, I'm frozen.
Sure. Okay, I didn't hear what you said at all. Then I don't think.
I think we're just kind of going a little bit mad there for a second.
Okay.
You go ask your question, I guess, and I'll just
Sure.
try to answer it as
Uh,
best as I can.
if you say that self ID is a meaningless definition, I would probably kind of agree with you. It is kind of a weird way to police a group, but wouldn't you say, like, let's say the way that you are perceived by society, that's a static enough definition, one that you can sort of test. It doesn't feel meaningless. Why not just jump
Yeah,
onto my side?
that's your side. However, that is not the LGBTQ plus side. Their side is
I
self-identified because
100%.
a lot.
I
Wait, wait.
100% disagree with that. I 100. I can. I all
Because
of my
again,
trans
because
friends.
because a lot of trans people are saying it's not about how I'm passing or not. It's about who I am and how I identify. But
Yeah,
what
but
you're saying
wouldn't
is it's based on how people perceive you. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but here's the thing. I know so many people who are part of the LGBTQ community who agree with me. I was just having a conversation with a trans woman who was saying, "Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with the performative state of gender. I think that that makes a lot of sense. I don't think that like self ID is a meaningful or like is the best way to describe someone. So I guess my question is like, and also I don't like, it feels weird to just sort of say, well, all of these people feel this way and they're wrong. I think that you can just say, okay, well, they might be wrong, but I can have my own unique position. I don't have to push myself so far away from that group just because they're wrong. I can sit a little bit outside and say, okay, well, you're right in some regards, you're wrong in some regards, but I'll just exist here. Does that make sense?
Sure. Now I'm just kind of realizing I thought I was arguing with somebody. Well, this is usually how I bring up with this argument that I bring up with people who say all you got to be a man is when you say that you're a man or when you feel your almost inner
It's
side,
a
whatever.
Yeah,
That's like this is just basically the ideology of self-identifying is a good enough justification for your claim. When the
yeah,
claim is
and
self-identifying in the first place, it
this
doesn't
is
really back up.
what I will say
So
is
what I'm so I guess actually um because you don't see self-identifying as like sufficient enough like reason to be trans, is that what you're saying? Then the
there's a
most
lot
inner,
of
the most hardcore LGBT, the most inner, the most
sure,
mainstream, I would
sure.
say, of the LGBTQ plus community would probably call us both transphobic, technically.
Uh, I like maybe like
I
the
wouldn't say that
crazies of the
I wouldn't say
crazies. Sure, but I think that I've met
they
so
are the
many trans.
loudest.
Like I'm very familiar with the trans community. I've dated trans people. I know trans
Me
people.
too.
I'm very good friends with a lot of trans people, and I think they have a very similar way of describing how they interact with society. Because like if
I
they would
did date
say,
a I did date a trans person who
mhm,
was, and it just actually was just a crazy person to begin with, but they were also, but
sure,
a lot of people who talk about this was also talking about how the my ex was talking about is just matters about self-identification. And I did actually kind of subscribe to that because I was initially a gender abolitionist first before
uh,
I came to these new conclusions.
sure. Um, so I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, man, like, yeah, I would agree. I would agree that there are some crazies out there who would call me transphobic. I think that is an insane position for them to take, and I think that that is actually the minority of people. And almost every trans person that I have talked to understands my position, understands, and honestly, most of the time agrees with me. Like, I don't know. I was just having this conversation like 3 4 days ago with a very close friend of mine who's a trans woman, and like was like, yeah, gender is performative.
I guess it's kind of a little bit of disconnect because
Yeah,
where
maybe.
I live is a very strong LGBTQ plus community, but everybody in this community where I live talks about self-identification is all you need. And that's why I left like my QSA when I was in high school. I just graduated. I stopped going to QSA because I stopped believing that self-identification was actually just justified. So it's just like how every person in real life that I've talked to, that's how they talk. So I guess a little bit of confusion.
Sure.
I like this conversation, by the way. I just love
Yeah.
this a little bit over hour long. If you want to go a little bit further, I just like to just talk
Yeah.
about the nature of gender in general.
Sure.
I would
Sure.
say it's a I'm kind of debating in my head how natural is this progression in our society. I would say definitely the root of it is natural, just stemming from the feminist movement, for starting from the first wave, because really this is the movement of feminism and LGBTQ plus is really just part of a larger movement to dissolve gender. First, dissolving the patriarchy with all the many waves of feminism, which is dissolving the expectations.
Wouldn't
Now men can have long hair, and I'm rocking the long hair right now. I'm enjoying growing it out. But
right.
maybe in the past that might have been like, oh, you look like a woman, whatever.
Right.
And now in society, like you can be gay, you can be a bisexual. I'm a bisexual, so I
I
appreciate those liberties. And
I'm
so what I see that from at least from the self-identification part, it's really just the next step in this progression of dissolving gender. Now it's just introducing illogical fallacies that I see, but these illogical fallacies is actually what's starting genderless parts of society. Again, like the
I don't know
communities
how
in my near area that talk about it, they talk about self-identification as your justified claim, making these words, as I said before, meaningless. And so effectively these are just spaces without gender. So it's just
um
like this is a progression, an acceleration at this point of gender
but
dissolvement.
you're in favor
It's
of that, correct? You're in favor of the dissolution of gender?
I would say for now I'm in favor for it, but that's because I want to wear a dress. That's really it. But I was thinking about today, right before this happened, that like that like there is probably a good reason like I because I like the family model of like somebody like the head of a household, but I don't like the idea that the man is the one to do it. I would like the idea that the people in the marriage gets to decide who's the one who goes out to work and who's the one who takes care of the children. But then I was thinking
Sure.
about it today. It was like, why is it like this? It's because of biology. It's because the mother's the one who gets pregnant and has the babies. And so then she's the one who stays at home, and then that means the dad has to go out and work twice as hard to feed more mouths. And so then
Sure.
he kind of like owns the home and then he becomes the head of the household. And because the man and his hormones is more likely to be stoic and more leadership, I would assume I'm not a biologist, so maybe I'm actually wrong about
Sure,
this, but
there's
I would
some
say
biological
that
component, but there's also a strong
there's a
social component.
biological component why men are more likely to be leaders. And again, they're a leader of the household. And
Yeah.
so then I'm like, well, you know what? There's good reasons why this family model is like this, and I would say it works. And I would say it's
I
kind of sad to
I
see.
would say
I would say it's kind of sad to see the family model like this is just dissolving.
I would say it works up to some degree because there's a lot of toxicity when it comes to the family model, especially when it comes to women who feel sort of like chained to their house because the man is the provider and they're like, "Oh, but I feel a lot of benefit. I feel a lot of strength when it comes to going to provide for myself and providing for my husband actually." Like and the not just that family model, but also sometimes it's like that dual partnership where there are two people who are providing essentially for themselves in that marriage so that they don't feel codependent on each other.
I
I
would say
mean,
that works out. My parents right now are in. Well, my mom used to work. Now she's kind of going back to the home, but for a good few years, both my parents were both providers, and it's because me and my brother were at an age where we could take care of ourselves, and we
right.
didn't need to be baby the whole day because we weren't
Yeah, so
babies
it's
anymore. But specifically, what about a baby, and then the mother is just given birth? Maybe it could work. I mean, I definitely some families have worked where after it's given birth, the, then then the dad actually stays home and the mom goes out to work. The
it
reason why it doesn't usually end up like that is because during pregnancy, the mom has to stay on leave and be at the home, and then the dad goes out to work twice as hard. And when the baby comes, the dad is already working twice as hard, and the mom is already at home. So it would like there would be a lot of conflict, not conflict, but like just be a lot of effort to switch those roles
right.
when you can just keep the roles like that. However, that doesn't necessarily this is like maybe like a general reason why it's most common like this. I would still say that in a marriage, if the two couples were like, we're gonna swap it around, you go stay at home, dad, I would say that works perfectly fine. I just say
I would
the
agree
model
that works perfectly
of
fine. So why would
yeah.
you consider that a dissolution of the family model, especially because I don't know any feminist,
Oh,
except for like
I don't think that's a disillusion. What I was referring to, sorry for interrupting, but what I was referring to was that I'm seeing obviously we're seeing a rise of um single mothers and dads leaving
yeah,
and
but
hookup
like
culture, and I'm like this is just kind of sad to see because
sure,
instead of
but
people fighting back by just swapping the roles, they're just getting rid of the roles, they're making it perverted, and I'm like
wouldn't
that's
you
just sad
say
to see.
oh, wouldn't so let me give a personal example. So my
Sure.
sister is a single mother, and the reason why
Uh-huh.
she's a single mother is because she got pregnant in her marriage into an abusive husband and essentially had to sever that marriage to save herself and her baby, and she hasn't been
Well,
able to
that's fine.
find someone who's able to support her. But like you say that's yeah, but like I guess that's what I'm saying is like when it comes to dissolution of like
If it's a toxic relationship, get out of there, leave. It's just not even just best for you, it's best for the child. You
I
don't
don't know
want a
anyone
bad
who's
dad. A
I don't
bad
know
dad is probably worse than no dad.
oh, sorry. Yeah, I think I
Forgot what
agree
I was
with you.
talking about.
I agree with you. Yeah, that a bad dad can be worse than no dad. Sure, and that's the philosophy that my sister took, and I support her through that. Like, um, I guess when you say like the dissolution of the family model, like I think what we're really just doing is normalizing that there's going to be exceptions to this behavior. Like, yeah, everyone would agree that two parents is probably the ideal situation for a child or some sort of group setting, and that we should strive towards that. But we should also normalize the idea that that's not going to work out for everyone, and that there might be better situations for one-off people. And I think that's all that like feminism or sort of like how I view the family model. I'm not mad at any person who's like who lives in that like nuclear family situation. I think that they're doing probably what's best for them. But I want to
I would
normalize them
say, you know
straying
what?
away
I
from the
agree.
yeah.
I would agree. What I'm probably seeing that is what I'm probably actually more referring to what I think is kind of sad is hookup culture. And that is people participating in a dangerous activity that could in result end in an abortion of a child. Probably not anymore because of Roe v. Wade, but we don't want to talk about that right now.
Sure.
The end of the abortion of the child, or the single mother, or just a broken home with
I have a
the
question.
because obviously because two humans that actually are not in a marriage or at least in a serious relationship,
Uh-huh.
and they produce something that produced life and that was not supposed to do that, is because
Uh-huh.
they fucked up. And I'm just like seeing this
Is
hookup
hookup
culture.
culture is hookup culture okay if in queer community in gay communities where it's impossible to procreate to have a
Oh,
child?
oh, that's a good. Well, I would say that not just the physical consequences. I would say
The
there's
emotional
also
as
an
well.
emotional consequence.
Sure.
And this is just
Uh
personally me because I used to participate in hookup culture kind of briefly, and
huh.
then I immediately left because I just couldn't handle it. I could not handle the because I was searching for romance and love, and I did not get that, and I got hurt
Sure.
just
What
because
I
of my
would
own lack of boundaries.
yeah,
So for some people,
but
they could probably handle it, and hell, they make an industry out of it. They make porn, and if they can handle it, that's fine. I would not encourage it though, because I
well,
would
I
say
think
there's
that
um,
there's a
I would
little
say
bit
there's
of
just
there's a little bit of
go ahead.
projection happening here because I
Definitely, I'm
participate in
kind of
hookup
projecting.
culture for sure, and I don't think that it's necessarily detrimental to my emotional state at all. Like I feel very in tune with my emotions. I feel very in tune with like how I feel and how I perceive the world. I don't think that I am getting a negative consequence out of hookup culture. In fact, I think that I'm getting a positive one where I'm interacting with people in a very vulnerable position, and I think that that's a very intimate moment for me, and that engaging in
What are
that can
you?
be very
If I may
beneficial.
ask, if that's not too
Yeah,
personal.
yeah. What's up?
Saying if it's not too personal, can I ask how old are you?
26.
So from my perspective, I'm 18,
Sure.
and so that was probably too young. I was gonna
Yeah, yeah.
say,
Maybe,
looking
but
back
I
on it,
think
that
that
was probably too young.
that's what it that like I feel uncomfortable prescribing any sort of like uh position for
Me
one
neither.
for yeah, so like when you say like hookup culture is bad, that's toxic. It's like it sounds like you're prescribing that for everyone when it sounds like it could be okay with for some people. It's just like
It
maybe we
could.
should
I
have
was.
more
I was gonna
information
say.
and we
I
should have
was
more
gonna say
hesitation
it
and
could be okay.
education.
I don't know. I wouldn't know the ratio of how good or how bad it is. I actually only have my bias, which would probably not help with what the truth is. I
Sure.
probably maybe have
And
to look at some statistics or empirical evidence of like how actually like, and I think I did. I looked at some studies
uh-huh.
about how there was some for some people it was had negative mental health implications.
Sure, I would never
And so I
disagree with
would
that. And
say
I
that
think
maybe perhaps the solution is not to like let's not encourage it, but let's also not say that you can't participate in it. Let's just say that
100%.
these are the risks, just like physical sex. And
100%.
for
And
some
I'm
people,
right
they
on board
probably
with
can't
that.
handle it for being too young, or perhaps that they have their
They're
some
not
sort
comfortable
of
with their own
inner
boundaries and
moral
they can't assert them.
compass.
Yeah.
Everybody's got their own boundaries. Some people are freaky, some people are vanilla, just like the same thing. Some people are just heartless romantics, and some
Yeah.
people don't have romantic attachments to it.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. And yeah, like that's what it comes down to. I I absolutely agree with you. Um, yeah,
I think
and
we've been
I
going at
guess
this for a while. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah. Sorry, I'm feeling comfortable giving broad prescriptions um, to any one person. That's all.
You bring up an interesting point because I was bringing up the physical consequences of it, of like the risk of having a baby, and that's not a family union. That's not a strong one. But then you brought up the like, what about gay sex, where there is no risk? There's risk of STIs, however, but there's no risk of having a baby. And so, I saw a TikTok a few days ago about how this one guy was making an argument. Maybe you saw it too, this one guy was making an argument that gay couples are actually more likely to be good parents because they have to go through the process of adoption and meet the requirements and like a background check, almost like of having a child. While straight couples, they can risk it and not be a good family union and actually not be good parents. And I thought about that. So you're for like because I was specifically critiquing about not having a baby, not having a family union, and how hookup culture is contributing to that. But then you bring up to what about gay sex, and I'm thinking about it as like, huh, maybe when straight people are saying like, or like maybe like religious Christians are like, that's perversion, don't participate in hookup culture to the gay people, they're prescribing, they know the risk themselves, both the spiritual damage and the physical consequences.
Mm-hmm.
But the physical consequences, not all of it, actually apply to gay sex. And now I'm thinking about it. It's such a simple fact that I already knew about, but now that like you're talking about it, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Sure. And the emotional, right? You would say that doesn't extend to every person, correct?
No, I already knew that it didn't extend to every person.
Sure.
I guess.
Sure.
Maybe it's hard to tell because like I don't know. It's just going to have to be something that you should have probably like teach young people before they even participate in hookup culture, before they find it out the hard way.
We should have informed consent when it comes to like the risks and dangers of hookup culture, when it comes to contraceptives, making sure that people are aware of birth control, and like 100%, I 100% agree with that.
Well, I think this conversation has been very productive. We could probably go longer, but I was wondering if you wanted to wrap it up.
I'm probably good for another half hour or so. I like 2-hour conversations is usually kind of good. I don't think we really landed on the HRT for children because you were very, very adamantly against that. And
I'm just highly skeptical. Now that's an uneducated bias that you could totally tap into right now.
Sure, I think that really all that the one factor that I would say is enough for me, and without it I probably wouldn't have it, is the fact that children are suicidal when it comes to their body image, when it comes to gender dysphoria, that it seems to be a hugely mental weight and strain on trans individuals, that alleviating from that, and that's a big thing as well, that it seems like there's an alleviation of that gender dysphoria when you engage in like changing your body in that way.
Can I point something out? Now, I watched a couple of interviews by this one guy who's also into gender and takes a sort of not one-sided approach to it, and probably more a position more like yours on it. Anyways, his name was Fable Liberty. There's a YouTube channel. He's a libertarian, but then he interviewed a detransition person and Buck Angel. And I remember in the interview that he was talking about, I don't have the source personally, but I would like to mention that he mentioned that there was a source that, yes, they alleviated anxiety and depression for a short while, but then over the years it came back even after it. So that kind of left an imprint in my mind. And then you talking about that reminded me of it.
Yeah.
Again, I don't have the source.
That's not every trans person's experience. That I've talked to a significant amount of trans people who say, yeah, that gender dysphoria never came back. And I think that's important to recognize, that this might not be a permanent solution, that it might not work best for you. Informed consent is something I'm huge about, right? Especially when it comes to medical procedures, which HRT essentially is. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't perform this for the people who need it, because people do need it and they can benefit from it, and that's important.
That reminds me of something else. Not to interrupt you. Go ahead. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
You're good. Go ahead.
Okay. No, that actually reminds me of the Buck Angel interview by the same guy, Fable Liberty. He was talking about how like he was talking about the risk of just handing out these hormones to people, and he said this is going to create a bunch of detransition people, and this is going to create a bunch of stigma on these transitions, and then he said this is going to hurt people who are like me, who actually have dysphoria, who actually need it. And so now when you're mentioning that, I was like thinking about like if we just pass this out like candy, and I'm not saying they are, but sometimes there is, because when I was watching the detransition,
because I mentioned that like there was a transitioner that I was talking about who said the same experience, and I'm like, that sucks. We can't just hand it out. Like
it actually hurts.
Yes,
it would actually hurt people who are actually genuinely dysphoric, who would actually need this to alleviate their
Yes,
depression.
100%. And I think that, yeah, you're going to need a couple therapy sessions to make sure that this is going to be what's right for you. Yeah, you're going to need to understand the circumstances and the possible negative externalities that will come about with getting these medical procedures. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have them, because that's going to exist with every medical procedure. Because I went through a bunch of surgeries and they go over the risks and they say, hey, these are the problems that might come about. I need you to be aware of it. And sometimes you engage with those medical procedures anyway, just because there's problems that can come about. Just let's make sure that we're aware of it. Let's make sure we're having that conversation. Yeah, they should be handed out like candy. We shouldn't just give it to everyone who says, sometimes I don't really like wearing a dress. Sometimes I really feel like jeans. That's crazy to just give that person HRT. But hey, maybe let's take a couple therapy sessions. Let's think about these thoughts. How is this affecting your mental state? How's this affecting you? And if it seems like it's actually having a little bit of a burden, but they don't feel comfortable enough to share, but after you start talking about it, it does seem like that might be beneficial. We start them off slowly. It seems like this might be beneficial for them. It seems like that it's alleviating a lot of mental duress they're under. I don't see why we wouldn't be for that.
Let me ask you a question. What is your opinion / observation on the current U.S. medical healthcare scene about giving kids, and maybe adults too, we can include that too, hormone replacement therapy? Do you think that it's ethical, like how we want to advocate something that is ethical, or do you think that it's moving towards unethical and we're just passing them out like candy?
I think that it heavily depends on which aspect we're talking about, because I do know a lot of trans people who basically they started talking to therapists, and it seems like they were pushing them super hard against the idea of going through HRT, so much so that it felt like they weren't listening or prescribing them in any sort of meaningful way. And there is a long history of medical abuse when it comes to trans people, but there's also that other flip side of that coin where it seems that like therapists are just like, yeah, okay, seems like they're trans, let's go ahead and give them the medicine. That both sides are wrong. Both sides are wrong, and I think that we can find a little bit of a middle ground and say, if after one therapy session you feel like this kid is ready to go on HRT and fundamentally change their body, I feel uncomfortable with that. I don't think that you're doing the right thing there. I think that we're going to need a little bit more of a conversation. But on the other side, there's that exact same pressure where it seems like there's a lot of people who are like, no, this is just a phase, right? This is just something that they're thinking. And every single trans person that I've talked to had said that they had people in their life who were saying, no, this is just a phase. We're just going to wait it out. And guess what? It's like 15 years later. They're like 25 years old, and they still feel the exact same way. So it depends.
Malpractice on both sides from two different sides.